Evening. My name is Yvonne Pulaski, and I have the honor of co-hosting the District Partnership Advisory Council with our Superintendent, Sean McKenna. This is our first meeting of the year, and I'm going to hand this one over right now to Sean to introduce the presenters.
Thank you, Yvonne, and welcome everybody. This is our first District Partnership Advisory Council meeting for the academic year. I am thrilled to welcome this evening Dr. Erin Dunn and Dr. Ravit Stein, who will facilitate a discussion on the book, The Disengaged Teen. And they are our good friends from EastCon. They work with a number of school districts in Connecticut, and we are thrilled to welcome them here for this presentation this evening. Welcome, Ravit and Erin.
Thank you so much for having us. We really enjoy our partnership with public schools and the ability to join today and talk about this really important issue that any of us who have teens can really take to heart and think about. And as part of our conversation, we will be talking a little bit about potentially the way that both Dr. Stein and I have had our educational background is in school psychology and in supporting students with academic and behavioral and emotional needs, and also our parents. And I'm sure you may have heard the saying, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. And so just to let you know that we learned a lot from our experience with engaging in this material as both psychology professionals as well as parents. And so we're excited to have this conversation. So I'm just going to start sharing some slides just to anchor the conversation and to keep us on track, but we really are hoping to have an interactive conversation about this resource and to think about how this applies in our own lives as well as in the lives of our students in the building. So thinking about building agency, belonging, and purpose, because of course we are really interested in our children being successful, however we define that with our children. But what we're really looking for is for them to be whole, well-rounded humans who contribute to society. And so really thinking about that purpose and belonging and agency is something that is a big focus of this work.
So Erin, as you're getting us started, I'm just going to introduce myself while you go to the next slide, and you'll.
Yes.
I can
a little introduction.
Yeah, I can just say hello as well. My name is Ravit Stein. I'm the Director of Consultation and Professional Learning at EastCon. Been at EastCon about 14 years and working with Griswold most of that time. So thrilled to have this opportunity to get to know additional parts of the Griswold community. And I'll be monitoring the chat and jumping in with some questions for you all as the audience. So as Dr. Dunn's getting started, I just wanted to invite you, and everything that I ask in the chat is just optional, but I wanted to invite you to share what brought you here tonight, what made you interested in taking a little bit of time out of your busy evening to join us tonight. And if you do have teenagers, if you'd like to share their ages, no need to share their names, but their ages, so we know sort of who's in the room, or if you're coming to us as an educator, even if you don't have children, many educators are benefiting from this book from the teacher and administrator perspective. So feel free to introduce yourself if you're willing, and just a couple of words of what brought you here tonight in the chat. And I'll be monitoring that chat and just sharing some themes with Dr. Dunn. And we'll be asking you a few questions tonight over the chat. So the more you can share with us, the more we can tailor this conversation to your needs. Thanks so much for joining.
Yes, thank you. So as I said, we're really hoping to have this be interactive so we can gear the conversation to what would be helpful for you. We're going to do a little bit of an overview of the concepts. It is not our expectation that you would have read this book necessarily. As part of the preparation for tonight, we're thinking that most people are joining to hear a little bit about it and may follow up. But we just want to give you a little bit of a foundation to build the conversation from. So when we're talking about engagement and we're talking about thinking about engagement, the first thing that we want to really prompt and bring to mind is, how would you describe a highly engaged child or student or person? What does highly engaged mean to you? So if you're willing to put something into the chat around what it means to be highly engaged, that would be great. We'll give it just a minute for you to think and add something.
We also encourage you, feel free, if you don't feel like writing into the chat, just to take notes on the side and jot down any words. I will also say that Dr. Dunn and I have a handout for you that you can download at the end, and we'll be sharing our slides with the Griswold Public Schools to share out as well. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Ashley. We're seeing things like exploring, self-motivation, driven, inquiry, awesome words.
Yes, yes,
Discovery.
yes. Yeah. So sometimes when we think about engagement, we might be thinking taking risks. I love this. Making connections. Really helpful, really thoughtful ways of thinking about it. Having buy-in. Yes. Yes. This is exactly what we're trying to think about often when we think about engagement. In the literature related to engagement, including the way that these authors frame engagement, they talk about a few different types of engagement, and the combination of these is really what they're looking for in terms of trying to engender engagement. And so the first piece is behavioral engagement, what we do, showing up, being present. Like, for example, just the fact that you logged in tonight is a level of engagement. Then there's the emotional engagement. So having there be a purpose, a motivation behind what you're doing. And then there's the cognitive engagement. So cognitive meaning what we think, how we think about things, our perspective on things, our ability to persist and actually accomplish the things that we want to. And these authors really stress another component. So we often see those three, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive, talked about in the literature. And these authors really also talk about a component that many of you highlighted in your response when you think about engaged or highly engaged students, which is agency, the ability to set meaningful goals and then achieve them through allocating time and energy and resources, and having and executing a plan, overcoming the barriers that we know are going to be in front of us, having both an internal and external tapping into those resources, knowing how to ask for help, and being driven. I think we saw that word a couple times, being driven towards something. Having a self-awareness to know where your strengths and areas of growth are so that you can make sure that you are setting off with a course towards a purpose. And so they take those different components of engagement. So we see that engagement piece here. And then there's the agency. And so we want to talk about these 4 different modes of engagement. So an achiever is going to be higher on engagement, but maybe lower on agency. And we're going to go through each of these specifically and talk about what the features are of these modes of engagement. And something that's really important to note is that it is not generally the case, and we wouldn't want to think about it this way, that someone is either an explorer or a passenger or an achiever or a resistor. But often we are all those things in different situations and under different conditions. So there are times where I might be a passenger, just kind of here for the ride, right? Like you might have shown up tonight and said, I'm going to go and I'm going to listen and just sort of absorb the information. I don't have a specific purpose to this. I'm not even sure if I want to put answers into the chat or have a conversation around this, but I just want to hear what's happening. So we are all these things in different situations, as are our children. So let's dig in a little bit more into what each of these types of engagement are, what each of these modes of engagement are. So we'll start with that passenger. So with the passenger, you're behaviorally engaged. So you've shown up, you're here. But from an emotional perspective, you might not really be connecting to the material. You might not be really feeling like there is a draw to you personally. You might not be particularly cognitively engaged. You might not be trying to solve the problem or really demonstrate your skill with something. You're just very present, but maybe not really connecting and invested is kind of how I would describe it. And then from an agency perspective, so agency being the extent to which you are driven and interested in learning for the sake of learning and exerting your own sort of power in this engagement, that's where we're talking about agency. So how much you are really putting yourself into it and pushing yourself versus maybe participating because of what you think others expect or the requirements of some type of certificate, things like that. So the passenger is along for the ride a little bit, but they are behaviorally engaged. And something that the authors really note is just like we are all these things at different times, it also isn't necessarily always the goal to be a high achiever or a high explorer in everything, right? We have a lot going on in our lives, and sometimes in some areas, we might need to be a passenger a little bit, given what's going on in our lives. So it's not a value judgment. It's just something to consider in terms of what am I getting out of this, or what am I coming into this with? So that's the passenger. The achiever is behaviorally engaged. They may or may not be emotionally engaged. So in this, we talk a little bit about happy achievers and unhappy achievers. So a happy achiever is maybe more emotionally engaged in what they're doing. They're actually personally invested in what they're doing. An unhappy achiever might be sort of doing it despite their lack of really connection with the material or with the task or activity. And as somebody who was exploring this in my own kind of mind with my 4 used to be teens, now I only have 1 teen because they've all, the older 3 have aged out of the teen years. But thinking about the idea that sometimes we may have a tendency to say, I don't really care if you like it, you just need to do it. That's sort of the difference between the happy achiever and the unhappy achiever. Then there's a cognitive engagement. So an achiever is cognitively engaged. They are working towards the task. They're working towards being better at the task or achieving more in the task. But their agency is really something that is held back from this. So they're not necessarily doing it out of their own drive, their own interest, but maybe because of what is expected or required for them to kind of move to the next level. And then we have the resistor. The resistor is more of that child who might be potentially refusing to get out of bed in the morning sometimes, not really wanting to go into school. Maybe they're not doing their homework. There's a lot of friction potentially around what you want or what the school requires and what they are doing or they want. And one of the things that I love about this discussion related to the modes of engagement is that sometimes we think about resistors as not really doing anything. They're refusing a lot. And so we have this idea that we describe them a lot by what they're not doing. And the thing that I really like to highlight around the idea that sometimes our teens might be resisting or resistors is that they actually are expressing agency. So they actually have a high level of agency. It's just not in the direction we want them to be going. And so when we think a lot about someone who is resisting, instead of thinking about what they're not doing, thinking about the idea that they are exerting this agency, but it's just not being steered in the right direction, and there's my mom influence, right? The right direction, but it's just not being steered in the direction that we would think is going to help them to be as successful as they can be in their life. So when we think about that resistor, they're actually not behaviorally engaged. Oftentimes, this is the biggest part of it, is that they're not feeling emotionally connected. They don't feel belonging. They don't feel like they are emotionally invested in whatever it is that task or activity is and is requiring of them. Typically, because of the lack of behavioral and emotional engagement, there's not much cognitive engagement, but they are exhibiting agency. And that is something that we can use in the way that we work and interact when we see a teen might be resisting. And then we have finally the explorer. And again, I want to think about the idea that while we would love our teens to be explorers in some things, it is probably not reasonable or possible to be an explorer in everything. That would be incredibly taxing and might not be even possible. So even though that means that this, in this activity, in this task, and in this moment, the person is behaviorally engaged, emotionally connected, working on acquiring skills and achieving within that area, and they're also exhibiting their own agency. They're learning for the sake of learning. They're wondering how this applies to other things. They're really driven on their own. They're self-motivated to invest in this activity or task. So they are all four of those things. And while we want that for our students and our teens, it's not necessarily the case that they're going to be that way for every type of activity and task. So as we think a little bit about that and have that caution with that perspective in terms of the idea that no one is going to be an explorer in everything, we want to think a little bit about how that sits with us. How did you feel as you heard about each mode of engagement? So we're going to give a second here for us to sort of reflect on that. put something into the chat if you feel comfortable, if you would like to unmute and talk a little bit about how you felt as you heard each mode of engagement. I know for myself, and I'll ask Dr. Stein to chime in, and others from educators from the district and around. How did you feel when you were hearing about these different modes of engagement and having engagement described in this way?
I think it's very easy for us to sort of put our students or our children into different boxes at different times. But when I was thinking about this question, I also thought it could be helpful to put myself into the situation to just honor, when am I a passenger? And then I was like, should I say this out loud? But I have to go to like a quarterly meeting about health and safety, like for KERMA, around like workers' comp at my agency. I'm definitely a passenger at that meeting. I am very hopeful and always want to keep all of our employees safe, but I really feel like when I sit in that meeting, I'm in passenger mode. And so it's helpful to, but then on the other side, when, I get to go to certain meetings with our special education directors, I'm in explorer mode. I'm interested. I want to hear about what we could do to solve problems. So when we think about when we are in passenger mode or in explorer mode, or I won't share when I'm in resistor mode, that it can be helpful to sort of then honor and validate our teens and our students when they're in those modes. So I encourage you actually to think about those modes and think about a time where you might be willing to share in the chat, like a time where you're an explorer, or a time where you're a passenger, or a time where you're an achiever or a resistor, if you're willing. So, Erin, do you mind just going back one slide so they can be seeing the perfect? So we'll just give you just a moment in the chat to just name, a time of day or a situation you're in where you might be in passenger mode or in explorer mode. And I'll just monitor that chat as Dr. Dunn continues on, and we'll have another activity. But we're going to actually spend most of the rest of our time today just kind of thinking through strategies that are relevant and helpful depending on what mode you're seeing children and students in. So really taking a look in the mirror for yourself about these is a helpful jumping off point.
Yeah, so just thinking about, where are you a resistor? Where are you an explorer? I'll say that I am a resistor before my coffee for just about everything. I'm like, I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do it. So, we find ourselves in those moments and normalizing it for yourself. And sometimes they can be really helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things that we might say to our teens that might help to relate to them so that they can also feel like, gosh, I didn't know that maybe sometimes you feel like a like in that resisting mode. And yet, how do you navigate through that? So we wondered how you felt when you heard about each of those modes. And then, as Dr. Stein said, sometimes it's sort of easy to put our students or our teens, our children, in the different boxes. And so we might be tempted to sort of think about, even just by categories of these activities, we might say sometimes have that tendency to sort of fall into the, I'm not a math person, or I'm not much of a creative writer. And so we may have a tendency to sort of categorize us in and our teens in these boxes. And we might be thinking about the traditional academic content. So when we're thinking about, where am I an achiever? Where am I a resistor? And we're thinking about that with our teens, it might be tempting to sort of just start with these most basic sort of academic areas, those core areas. And so if we were to think about those, you might be rating your teen or even your own experience through school in one way, but you might even expand your categories a little bit more. So you might be thinking about, okay, well, yeah, maybe I was a passenger often in math, or maybe in certain kinds of math. So maybe in geometry, I was more of a passenger, but in algebra, I was more of an achiever. And actually, by the time I got to, they don't even call it trigonometry, I don't think anymore. But by the time I got to that, I was more of an explorer. But what about things that are a little bit more outside of what we think of as those sort of traditional academic categories? You might think about extracurricular sports, music, dance, theater, and then you might even get really broad. And so Dr. Stein is going to drop into the chat a PDF, a link to a PDF that has these sort of categories in them. They're obviously not exhaustive, but just thinking a little bit more broadly about your teen, yourself, or your child, and thinking about where might they be more of a passenger or an achiever or an explorer. And if you take a look through this, and again, you might look through this and say, well, it's not really hitting on one for me or for my teen, but just take a minute and see, can you think of something where your child or your teen is an explorer? Maybe it's not world languages, but maybe it is time with friends. Maybe they're the one who's always planning the activity. Maybe it is something like activism. Maybe your teen is somebody who really is passionate about some type of cause. Maybe it's crafting. So just taking a minute, and if you don't mind putting in the chat, especially if it's not on this list, because we would love to get even more broad, is there something that you can think of that your child would typically be in an explorer mode for?
You should have access to the resource either by clicking on that link or by looking at it via the QR code, but please do let me know if you're having trouble seeing it. You may or may not have read the book, but one of the things that was really striking for me in the book was just how they sort of, the vignettes that they used to describe real teens that were resistors in one way, and then really just kind of talk through exciting ways that they were explorers. So again, if you're interested in reading the book, and one of the things that may be helpful is to just like they visualize this teen and what it means for that teen to be an explorer in a really unique way. So they talk through some of these different examples, but we'd love to hear from you. If one isn't on this list, or something that you've seen either one of your students or your own teenager doing that you're like, wow, that is, even if it is on this list, something that made you think, oh, wow, that is explorer mode. Or maybe they love it and you didn't realize that maybe they're in explorer mode. I got a weird message that, oh, there we go. Perfect. Wasn't sure if I was getting the texts. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I love that. Yeah. So we see that there's a lot of variability in how we engage in the world, and the specific activities. And when we think about how we might plot our engagement for different activities or different interests, it can be the case that, again, we're not just one of these. We're each of these at different times and under different conditions. And so if that's the case, that the environment and the conditions are something that matter to us in terms of where we fall on this, then that also means that as educators and family members, we can have influence over the transition between these modes. And so if they're not static, which they're not, then it means that we actually can have some influence. And there's quite a bit of research that shows that even at the teen age, that parents have an incredible amount of influence around engagement. Now, sometimes that is good news. Sometimes it can lead to us feeling a little bit like stressed or like, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong if my student is not in an explorer mode in this particular area? No. But it does mean that we might be able to strategically do some things that move them a little bit more towards where we would love to go. Oh, I didn't have, Glenn, thank you for sharing that. Hunting and fishing and exploring the capstone projects. I did not have that. Now we have one more thing to put on our list of areas that students can be an explorer in, or people can be an explorer in. So how do we support our teens? Thinking back to that engaged student, let's think about, from a classroom perspective, when you were a student, or when you hear your teen talk about their instructors, and maybe it's an educator at the school, maybe it's a dance teacher, maybe it's a advisor for a club, but what do we think about those individuals doing that might foster engagement? What do those activities look like? What are those people saying? And I saw that Aaron, you put into the chat that positive praise, that when your teen is receiving positive praise, that fosters engagement and helps to sort of dial it up a little bit. What else do we see those professionals in our teens' lives doing that really enhances their engagement?
And again, really bringing it back to your own engagement, because I think there's just so much to learn from what we as individuals feel like in these different modes. If you can think of a time when you're in explorer mode, what's happening around you? What does the environment look like around you? What are the people around you doing that makes you feel like you are in explorer mode? Feel free to share that, even if it's just for yourself.
Choice, having some choice in your learning. I love that. That is definitely something that we see foster engagement. So just coming back to the idea that people around our teens and people around us do have influence on engagement, and learning what we can do to match where they are with kind of dialing it up a little bit can be incredibly helpful. And I'm seeing some really cool things coming into the chat, so I want to make sure that we circle back to those things, and that we are hearing a little bit, Ravi, about what other people are seeing those educators doing that helps foster the engagement. What kinds of things are people saying?
I love that one of our participants talked about the level of excitement that the teacher demonstrates when they're in their own learning. So they're just as excited as the students. So it feels authentic for the students to be excited. And I also noticed the way that the students can demonstrate that they know something in different ways. So when we as educators or as parents check in with our students in different ways, or our children in different ways, they can share their knowledge in a broader way. That's something that can really help them feel excited about being an explorer. So like you're saying, I'll keep watching the chat, but I think this is one of the most important slides that Erin has in this presentation. So the idea of what is our in, how do we get our foot in the door with our kiddos or with our students?
Yes, because depending on where they are in the day, where they are in their life, nothing is, well, I was going to say nothing is as hard as parenting a teen. I'm sure there are harder things,
But we don't know what they are.
I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we get I certainly have some that are a little more chattery and willing to talk than others, but the one that I am currently most focused on is quite silent when I ask questions. And so something that we can learn about is how to get past that a little bit. And so we need an in, and I'm just going to draw a little bit of inspiration from Ted Lasso and really be putting on a attitude of being curious and not judgmental. And I said putting on an attitude because sometimes it does feel like my non-judgmental costume, because it is very hard when we want our teens to have everything they possibly want later in life, and we don't want them closing any doors now to something that they might want later. And we know that their brains at 13, 14, 15, 16 aren't necessarily wired to think super long term. And so it can be very tempting to jump in with like, you don't understand and you don't know where this is going. And I'm quoting myself here. But putting on that costume of being curious and not judgmental is really key. So having some go-to phrases, questions, and we'll plant these throughout the rest of our conversation that you can draw from and think about, is this something that would feel authentic to me, or how would I make this feel authentic to me? So if my kiddo says something like, I don't care about this, there's no way that this is going to ever be relevant to me. Well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about why you think that. Not from a judgmental, not tell me more, not in that judgmental tone, but literally tell me more about why you think that. And another good way to kind of open the door when you're asking a question and they're talking about what they are working on. Oh, I don't remember that from when I went to school. Can you explain it to me? How would you explain that to me? I don't know what that is, or we didn't cover that when I was in high school, or that's, maybe I covered it, but I really truly have no recollection of European history. Tell me a little bit more about that. I don't know the answer, but let's ask ChatGPT or Google. So when you're having those conversations about, they're asking very complex questions, or very frustrated about something, I don't know, let's look into that. I really don't have a good answer for that. Being able to ask specific questions. So are you still discussing whatever it is in history class? How's that going? I used to know how to graph equations, but I forgot. How does that work? Show me how to do that. So asking in a curious way what they're working on. Tell me more. What makes you say that? So if there's something like, ugh, I had this horrible test today, it was, terrible. I don't even know why we're being asked for this. What makes you say that? Tell me a little bit more about why you had that reaction. And some questions that I really think, this is one of the questions that I really have taken from this. What do you wish the teacher would have done to explain it differently? So this is again for those times where the student might be feeling more resistant, might be feeling a little frustrated, something that you can come back and discuss in terms of just what we would describe as openers. So an opening to the conversation. So we're not shutting that student down, not judging their feelings, but really asking a little bit more about where they're coming from so that we can relate to whatever it is that is being experienced. And so I do want to do a couple of pro tips. So number one is looking through your kiddo's schedule. so that you actually can ask some specific questions. So taking 2 minutes to just dig in a little bit to the assignments. And then another one is to go deep and not broad. So instead of what I have a tendency to do sometimes, where I'm like, what are you doing in English? What are you doing in history? What are you doing in math? What are you doing in blah, blah, blah? Digging a little deeper into one of those things instead of trying to kind of address all of them. And maybe starting, especially if your kiddo is like mine and a little bit more on the quieter side, starting with their favorite thing. So going deep, but going deep in just something that that they're actually already engaged in.
As we're continuing to talk through strategies, because in the last about 17 minutes that we have, we really want to give you some different ideas for strategies and hear which ones kind of resonate with you. So as Dr. Dunn's talking through some of these different strategies, feel free to let us know which ones you might be interested in trying. What we know about habit planning is like saying it out loud can help you consider the idea of actually trying it. So I've just popped the different potential sentence starters or sentence stems into the chat that Dr. Dunn just reviewed, but feel free to just cut and paste the one that you felt like, hey, I might actually try that with my student or with my child. Or if there's one that this made you think of that you might try yourself, feel free to add that into the chat. We're interested in which ones are resonating with you as like, oh, I don't usually ask my child that, but I might try.
So if we are thinking about a situation where we are working with a teen or we have our own teen who's in passenger mode, again, that's someone who's behaviorally engaged, but not really connecting and driven or self-motivated in the area that we're looking at, what can we do? And with passengers, we want to dig a little bit more into what's under that. What's kind of coming with the why is there a passenger? Is it because they are sort of feeling like they don't have the skills for the area? Are they bored because they are a little beyond what the expectations are? Do they find it uninteresting? It's just not a passion of theirs? Or do they maybe not see the connection to real life? So these can be some common reasons why someone might feel like they are in passenger a little bit. And so what do? We want to share our passion and encourage being around peers that inspire. So when we think about what makes us shift a little bit towards more of a explorer mode, as Dr. Stein was talking in your own life, think about how much more engaging and fun it is to do maybe a book club versus reading your book yourself on your own. Or maybe, when you're going to a meeting and your favorite people that you work with are in that meeting, that can make all the difference in the world. So encourage your teen to be around other peers that inspire. So for that particular task or activity, can you match them up with someone who actually is a peer that does enjoy that task, that is motivated to do that thing? And sharing your own passions. So letting them see that you have your own interests and passions and that you can be someone who sometimes is in explorer mode. We want to make sure that we're meeting them where they are. So again, being curious and not judgmental. And this one here, this piece related to how we might increase cognitive engagement, is offering explanations for why. So oftentimes that might be because a student feels like, I don't get how this applies to my real life. I'm not sure why I need to learn algebra. I don't understand how it's going to matter or why I need to study history. There's two reasons why we want to do this. The first reason is that, again, we're looking to make deeper connections with whatever the task is. The second reason, which is sort of an interesting outcome in research is that when we have studied how to get people to do things. So for example, there was a study where people wanted to cut in line while other people were waiting to make copies. And when they did this study, they looked at how often people allowed that person to cut in front of them. And when the person said the word because, the number of people who let them cut in front of them was significantly higher. It actually didn't even matter what their because was. Like literally people would be like, I need to get in front of you to make copies because I need to get in front of you to make copies. And they would be like, okay, way more often. So as humans, we are conditioned to do things more often when someone gives us a why, a because. So we're doing it for those two reasons. Number one is to make sure that we're getting them connected cognitively to whatever it is and really trying to engender motivation. But number two is it's a great technique because we know that when you use that word because, people are more likely to do what it is that you need them to do. We also want to make sure we're using invitational language. Invitational language is where we are not demanding something, but inviting someone to do something. And we can do that in one way is providing that choice. And so I know somebody mentioned that in our chat, providing choice. And then also fostering those interests outside of school. So we can help spark engagement in other areas by recognizing and highlighting engagement in things that are potentially outside of what we would traditionally think of as areas that we're looking for our teens to achieve. And we really want them to be able to reflect on what they need. So what do you need from me to help this move along a little bit more? What do you need to feel more engaged? We want to be able to create that skill of reflection, and we will come back to this again. Now, I gave some examples, but this might feel still a little bit 30,000 feet. So we wanted to do talk a little bit more about what it actually looks like. So here is a 5-step process that you can go through when you're trying to encourage someone to move from that passenger mode to more of a explorer mode. So number one is perspective taking. So how are you feeling about your homework tonight? What part of your homework is most interesting? So asking them what their perspective is on what it is that needs to happen. Number two is acknowledging where they are. So if they're like, ugh, I really don't want to do this, it's so boring, then we want to say, you know, gosh, yeah, I hear you. It probably is a little bit boring. You'd probably rather be with your friends. If I were you, I would feel the same way. So not arguing with where they are, but acknowledging where they are.
Step 2 is the most often missed. And step 2, I can speak from experience. And step 2 is the one that when I know that we're not supposed to have a favorite step, but if you were to take one step from this whole list, I think that one of the things that can be hard for us as adults is to feel like when we validate that we're like telling him it's okay to be bored. And so I just want to like honor that, like it can mean a lot to a child to hear you just say, wow, that does sound really boring. That is really, really powerful when someone is in passenger mode. You're not going to get them out of passenger mode by saying that. You're just going to help them understand that that feeling of being in passenger mode is real, and that can start the conversation of moving towards explorer mode. So all of the steps are important, but were you to take one step away from helping your child or student move from passenger mode, consider what it might look like to actually acknowledge something that is pretty hard or boring or non-preferred for them.
Yes. And I would piggyback on that, especially because, you know, what happens, I don't know if anybody has had this experience, but what happens when your teen says something like, I hate this. This is terrible. And you kind of skip the acknowledgement and move to fixing and trying to sort of push towards what you want. I know from my experience, and I also know I can be this way, that we have a tendency to then, as being that person who's feeling that way and feeling judged, maybe that we shouldn't be feeling that way, is to defend ourselves and continue to explain why we're feeling that way. But when we can acknowledge that that is an appropriate way to potentially feel, we can de-escalate that and then actually ultimately move to a solution. So acknowledging is an important piece. And then making sure that we do the explanation for why it is that we need, so that because, and then an invitation. So instead of sit down and do 20 minutes, we could say something like, try doing 20 minutes and see how far you get. And then having patience, deep breaths. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We don't want to win the battle and lose the war, right? We want to build this internal agency and passion for activities and engagement in the world. And when we kind of say, you know what, we're going to take some deep breaths, and I'm going to not worry today that the fact that you didn't do this homework might derail your entire college career in life. You know, we can kind of go down that road. I'm just going to have a little bit of patience in this moment. We're going to talk a little bit about the achiever, but we're going to kind of move a little bit quickly through the achiever so that we can spend a little bit more time on the resistor, because we are tight on time. And I think that that one is probably the one that most of us are kept up at night about, potentially. And so we do see achievers, and with achievers, we really want to engender that emotional connection. So that really is about making sure that that teen sees themselves as more than their achievements, more than the things that, you know, more than their gold stars. So it's really broadening their focus on relationships, recognizing them as a whole person, making sure that we are helping them to do things outside of their comfort zone that they might not be successful with right away, so that they can learn that feeling of discomfort and understand that just because they didn't achieve it perfectly doesn't mean that it wasn't worth doing. And then just creating opportunities for downtime. Our achievers, our high achievers, happy or unhappy achievers, have a really difficult time with downtime and just giving themselves a minute to just be in themselves. And so those are some of the things that we want to do. And part of that is helping them to reflect on what they need. Again, what do you need to be able to have some downtime? How can we protect some time for you to just breathe a little bit and give yourself space to not think about all the things that you want to do, but thinking about the things that you already are? So what does that look like? It's asking good questions that maybe we haven't thought of in the past, or maybe we have our own go-tos around this. Just asking them what charges their battery. A lot of high achievers don't actually know what fills their cup. They're not really sure. They're very thoughtful about what they're doing and not what they are sort of experiencing. So asking this question, what would you do if you weren't focused on achieving? What would you do if you weren't doing all the things that you need to do to get that A in every class? So really helping them to explore their identity. What's something you're afraid to do because you think you might not be good at it? Getting them outside their comfort zone. What would you do for downtime if you didn't have access to technology? So getting them to really explore those things. So finally, let's talk a little bit about the resistor. and make sure that we give a little bit of time to what we can do to help to turn that around a little bit. Number one, listen. Number one is to help and hear. If a student or a teen is talking about barriers to their ability to engage that include things like bullying, mental health struggles, being overwhelmed, we need to listen and meet them where they are. We want to do a lot of acknowledgement and validating and modeling your own coping skills and your own experiences where maybe you have had a really difficult time, but made it through that. How did you cope with that? Focusing on the future, but tying that to the present. So, you know, here's where we're trying to go. And what does that mean for you right now? What are your goals? How do you see yourself getting there? And then helping students to identify strengths, interests, and values. So really looking at where are they explorers and how do we tap into that and really help them to acknowledge that feeling that sometimes they are an explorer and they are using their agency. And how do we use that to help spark engagement and exploration in other areas? So what does that look like? So it looks like, number one, being non-judgmental. I've noticed you've been feeling really down lately. I'm here if you need me. Being, I think in the book and in our life, sometimes we talk about it as being in the trenches. You know, sometimes when you have somebody who's going through something, a friend, or sometimes when you've been going through something that's really difficult, it's just nice to have someone who will climb into the trenches with you and just sit there and let you feel what you're feeling. And so being non-judgmental, I know it's really, really hard some days to get out of bed and get to school. I'm here if you need me, if you're ready to talk. I want to hear about why you're feeling that way. Acknowledging that struggle. I see things are hard for you. I want you to know that you can share anything with me. Expressing a desire to understand. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, but I want to understand and help you any way I can. And then validating those feelings. I see you're upset. Remember, you're not alone in this. What's one thing I can do right now to support you? I really love that last question because many of us want to figure out how to fix it or how to change it right now. And so we can tend to sort of put our own answers to what we think the solution should be. It's also really hard sometimes when you're in that space of being really down or resisting to think of everything that needs to happen to move you from where you are to where maybe you would ideally like to be. So just thinking about what's the first thing, what's the one thing, what's the next thing that maybe we can do that would be supportive. It might not fix it, but it's being supportive. And when we see that we are kind of working through meeting the student where they are, climbing into the trenches, understanding where they actually do have a spark, and then moving towards incorporating that into future and current activities, we can really start to just turn that knob a little bit. A couple more: sharing personal experience, offering alternative ways of connecting. If talking feels like too much, we can go for a walk or do an activity. Sometimes just being together can help. And then giving that unconditional support. It's okay to not feel okay. This is part of life, but you're not alone. Everybody has that feeling sometimes. So just really taking time to do that deep connecting. So we just want to thank you. I know we're a couple minutes over on our timing. We really appreciate you giving us a chance to talk about this important concept of how we can engage our teens, especially when maybe they're not where we want them to be or where we think that they need to be for long-term success. We can stay and chat for a few minutes if anybody has questions or thoughts. And we really enjoyed being able to join you tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn, and thank you, Dr. Stein. I just got several texts. Just to reiterate, you will be sharing the slide deck with us.
Yep,
That
it's right in the
way-
chat, and I've also
Okay.
sent it to Mr. Chaplin
Okay.
earlier. I can make sure that it goes to all of you an email, and also, so once you're in that, does everybody see it in the chat? Should be
I
a
see it. Yeah.
PDF that you can download, and that should have those clickable links as well to the activity. And I'm also just going to add the Disengaged teen link to that resource that Dr. Dunn shared earlier. That's up earlier in the slide.
We thank you, everybody, for joining. And if there are any follow-up questions, you certainly have both Dr. Dunn and Dr. Stein's email. Yvonne, our next meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, is November 5th.
Yes, it is.
And we're
Yes,
going to
it is.
do I think a session we're working on with Elaine Taylor from Griswold High School on college finance. So that should be interesting. But thank you very much to everybody. Thank you again to Ravi and Aaron for a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.